Be part of the peace movement. Share this episode using hashtag the Great Disarmament and download the free peace resource guide at aviskalfsbeek.com/peace guide. The Great Disfarmament, The Great Disarmament, Part 6, Regeneration and Resistance. Hi, I'm Avis Kalfsbeek, author, podcast host, and peace storyteller. This is The Great Disfarmament, The Great Disarmament, a special podcast series from Pieces Here, tracing the parallel histories of how we learn to kill and how we might stop. If you're just joining us, welcome. Each episode maps a moment in the twin stories of war and agriculture. Previously in The Great Disfarmament, we traced how war and farming became not just linked by necessity, but fused by design. From trenches to toxins, we saw how the weapons of war became tools of the field, how nitrogen bombs became nitrogen fertilizer, how control over land, seeds, and people became the prize. Through guano, gunpowder, the Dust Bowl, and the Green Revolution, we watched a planet trade its memory for management, and we heard the warnings from forgotten farmers to scientists like Rachel Carson, who asked us to listen again. Now we turn toward the second story, not how we learn to kill, but how we might stop. Today's episode brings us to the edge of empire, of resistance, and of remembering. From the 1980s to the early 2000s, seeds became patented, farmers were criminalized, and wars grew both quieter and more elusive. Yet beneath the noise of this global machinery, something ancient began to stir beneath the soil. Setting the stage. The disfarmament was nearly complete. The soil had been stripped, the seeds were owned, the farmers were in debt, and the world had been told, this is progress. But something unexpected happened. In the midst of chemical dependency, corporate consolidation, and industrial monocultures, people began to listen. They listened to the land, to their ancestors, to each other. And in doing so, they began to save something far more powerful than profit: seeds. This episode is Regeneration and Resistance, the story of how resistance germinated underground. Let's begin, as we always do, with the weapons. By the 1980s, the Cold War had turned into a geopolitical performance, each side watching, waiting, stockpiling. Nuclear arsenals grew to unimaginable proportions. The Strategic Defense Initiative, nicknamed Star Wars, promised a futuristic shield of space-based missile systems. The defense industry swelled with money and ambition. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, the world paused. Peace felt possible. But by the 1990s and early 2000s, warfare had simply changed shape. The Gulf War introduced a new form of violence: high precision, low visibility, heavily televised bombings. Military contractors became permanent global actors, and the attacks of September 11, 2001 launched a war without borders and without end. Weapons now came with marketing departments, with shareholders, with sleek names and long contracts. In agriculture, the same logic applied. In the early 1990s, genetically modified crops were pushed onto global markets. Corporations claimed ownership over seed genetics, transforming life into property. The, quote, Terminator seed was engineered to be sterile after one harvest. Farmers who saved seeds, once the most basic act of cultivation, faced surveillance, lawsuits, and even prison. Seeds became intellectual property. Farmers became software users. Dependence became policy. And yet, even in this era of total control, something old and resilient took root. People began to say no. They began to save seeds. And by doing that, they began to disarm. Today's voice is Winona LaDuke, Anishinaabe writer, environmental leader, and longtime advocate for Indigenous food sovereignty. Her words and her work remind us that resistance is not always loud. Sometimes it is as quiet as saving a single kernel of corn. She writes, "The recovery of the people is tied to the recovery of food, since food itself is medicine, not only for the body, but for the soul. It is our memory, our history, our joy, our survival." To protect seeds, LaDuke teaches, is not just to preserve biology, it is to protect ceremony, to protect memory, to protect the future. What it means for us. This is the final chapter of the Great Disfarmament and the first glimpse of what might grow in its wake, because seeds are not merely things, they are acts of defiance. They are vessels of ancestral knowledge. They require faith, planted in silence, nurtured with care, and trusted to unfold in their own time. You do not control a seed, you accompany it. A seed is the opposite of a weapon. It cannot be rushed, it cannot be hoarded, it cannot be owned. And in this moment, against all odds, people chose the seed over the sword, even as bombs fell in distant deserts. Even as boardrooms patented genomes, something else was beginning to grow. From the page to the soil. Robin Wall Kimmerer, scientist, botanist, and citizen of the Potawatomi Nation, reminds us that plants are not just organisms, but teachers. In Braiding Sweetgrass, she writes, "Plants know how to make food from light and water. We forget. They remind us." And they remind us of more than that. Sweetgrass, she tells us, is a gift. It does not belong to the giver or the receiver, but to the relationship between them. In the old ways, a gift is never meant to be hoarded. It circulates, it connects, it nourishes community. This is how seeds resist empire, not through confrontation, but through reciprocity, through remembering. In Kimmerer's vision, saving a seed is an act of kinship. It is a whisper to the future, a vow to return. And it is this vow taken in gardens and kitchens and seed banks and ceremonies around the world that began the work of disarmament, not with fanfare, not with force, but with faith in what the earth remembers. Next episode, we pause to look back. Part 7 is a moment of reflection, a recap of what we've covered so far in the Great Disfarmament, and a breath before we cross into the Great Disarmament. Then we begin again with Spears and Surrender. I'll see you there. Before you go, be sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss any of the episodes in the Great Disfarmament, the Great Disarmament series. That wraps up this episode of Peace is Here. Will you please take a moment to subscribe and share it with a friend? Subscribing helps others discover peaceful, independent storytelling, and it means a lot to me. I'm Avis Kalfsbeek, author of the Pedro the Water Dog Saves the Planet series, eco-adventure novellas for readers who care about environmental justice, joy, and saving the world one story at a time. You can learn more at aviskalfsbeek.com. Book 6, Mono Mutante, is now available at all major online retailers, or if you'd like to support my book directly, you can get the ebook at aviskalfsbeek.com/mono-mutante. It's a wild satirical ride through food, farming, and the messiness of recovery. When you subscribe to my list, you'll also be the first to hear about my next book, Bulletproof, which asks, what in the world are we going to do about guns? A link to subscribe is in the show notes. From October 18th to November 8th, 2025, I'm running a live Kickstarter campaign. I'd be so grateful if you'd visit aviskalfsbeek.com/Kickstarter to get notified. I'm creating a companion field journal for Book 1, One More Year, called Peace Stuff Primer, along with a stage play version of the book. I can't wait to share it with you. This episode was human narrated by me with the help of AI, which has promised to let me know if it ever makes something up. So far, no confessions, but if you think I've missed something or if you just want to say hello, I'd love to hear from you. Podcast music is by Javier Peque Rodriguez. You'll find links to his music on Spotify and Bandcamp in the show notes. I'm Avis Kalfsbeek. Thank you again. Until next time, listen for the peace.